Today I am back with Seth, Tyler, and Andy to discuss what your weekly marketing and website checklist should consist of. So we use checklists all the time here at O8. We believe success comes when you have a steady, clear focus on what you want to achieve and when you take steps every day to work towards that. So a weekly checklist really helps you stay on track and keep your team aligned, and then we can also do daily or monthly checklists. But let's start by chatting about our website. What types of things do we check in on or need to complete each week with our website?
The list here is going to vary based on the complexity of the site, but there are some standard things that pretty much everyone with any site can and should be doing. This will look like weekly audits with tools like SEMrush or Moz, your standard SEO platforms. And then also checking in on several things that are going to be impacting performance, user experience, or your SEO efforts. This can include things like uptime reporting, checking to make sure that your redirects are working correctly. So that's like HTTP to HTTPS, or you have no www, that making sure that that's redirecting to the www version correctly. And then any other really key redirects that you have on your site that are going to be very important to user experience. And then just making sure that really any indexing issues are being addressed as quickly as possible. So this will look like duplicate meta tags, title tags, any issues with your robots.txt, which is the file that kind of says to search engines, look at this part of the site, but don't look at that part. As well as then the X robots, which is a per page version of that, where it says, look at this section of the page, but not these other parts. Making sure that your canonicalization is squared away so that you don't end up with duplicate content issues. Checking to make sure that your sitemap is being generated correctly, and just the million other crawling and indexing related issues that could pop up when you're looking at a site, as well as a really big one, which is malware detection. So running checks regularly on your site to make sure that it hasn't been compromised is always a good thing to do, especially when you're handling any sort of e-commerce or semi-personal information.
Yeah, and then,
go ahead, Seth.
Depending on the complexity of your site and how many stakeholders are in there changing things, and depending on your development workflow and all that, tools like Visual Ping, on core, highly business critical pages to detect any visual flaws that may have popped up from a content editor or a developer unintentionally doing something. Can be nice, as well as just the concept of automated testing in general, especially that critical e-commerce path or any business critical page. There are ways to do this, not weekly, but just in time, as well as something adverse is detected. So that's something worth mentioning as well, I think.
Yeah, those automated tests, especially on those business critical pieces, if you can set those up more consistently, like even happening every 5-minute checks, just because, 5 minutes on an e-commerce site could translate to a lot of money if there's an issue with that pathway. So that's a really great point, Seth. Some other things that I like to look at, especially with larger sites, is going to be internal search trends. This is something like we spend a lot of time looking at SEO related searching and trends. But we have our own little mini search engines within our sites. And a lot of time, especially on those larger sites, this is going to give you insight into what your current users are looking for on the site. And this can be really helpful as far as like for enterprise related situations. What are my internal teams looking for? What's going on inside my organization? And then helping to adjust and tune those search results to better serve those trending issues and topics.
So Andy, from your perspective, from more of like the marketing side of the website, are there metrics that you should be reviewing like daily, weekly? What do you really check in on when you're looking into the checklist?
Yeah, well, I mean, everything we're talking about so far has to do more with the site's performance and its stability, and all of which is really important. Clearly, I mean, just for good user experience, for security, for SEO. But on a real basic level too, you just want to check in on your traffic and not just look at it and go, oh yeah, that looks okay. But compare that week over week, month over month, year over year. Is traffic trending up, down? If it is down, or if it's up for that matter, what's causing that? Do you know? Is it seasonality? I mean, many industries are like that, and you can see a consistent pattern. If you go back and you check over the last few years, you see that, oh, I'm always up in May and June, or I'm always down in August, or whatever. So if you're what you're looking for is anything that stands out of your traffic, that seems out of the ordinary, and then you want to drill down to some extent. If you're doing this on a regular basis, then you already have some understanding of probably what is driving your traffic, which channels, which segments, and so forth. But if you see something anomalous, then you drill down and start looking at, okay, can I isolate this? What's causing this? Is the traffic, let's say it's a traffic drop. Am I seeing this? This is relative to last week or last month. Am I seeing it for a particular geography? Is it happening on mobile but not on desktop, et cetera? So divide and conquer, segment until you figure out what's potentially going on. Hopefully that's all good news, but you do want to drill down and investigate if something is off kilter.
Yeah, a great example of this happened with our own site just a couple weeks back. I forget the specific keyword that we were looking at, one of them that we monitor regularly. We noticed that in one of the month over month or week over week reports, we saw a pretty drastic, for our site, drop in organic search traffic relating to this specific keyword. You know, we'll call it Drupal. I don't remember what it was, but the Drupal keyword, for instance. And in digging into that, we saw that, you know, our impressions and things like that, and the click-through rate in the SERPs was still holding steady. Our position was still doing really nicely. It's just that overall in Google, traffic and searches for this particular keyword had dropped drastically. And in its place, we uncovered a new trend that now we're pivoting toward to help reposition some of our content to begin addressing this shift that we're seeing. So it's something that, you know, we do all the time, and those numbers are going to fluctuate constantly. You know, but really those diagnostics that Andy, you were just talking about are so important, not just from the SEO perspective, but also that can be really important just for your business, you know, as a whole, and some of the offerings and messaging that you're thinking about rolling forward.
And then, of course, while we're talking the site, it's not just traffic, but also its conversions. You know, what are the macro micro conversions you've set up? And again, how are those trending over the past week, over the past month? Anything out of the ordinary? Any good news? You know, I mean, and bad news in its own way is instructive as well. And again, same basic issue, try to understand what's driving those conversions, which segments seem to be converting at a higher rate. Is it local or regional versus, say, national? Is it certain states or certain cities? Mobile versus desktop? If you have demographics enabled in Google Analytics, is it certain age groups or other demographic segments that might be converting at a higher rate than others? All of that can give you insights as to how you should potentially evolve or modify your site to cater to the groups that are getting the most value out of it. Or if you feel that a key group isn't getting value, then doing essentially a response to that to make sure that you are providing valuable information to someone that you feel is underserved and maybe not as converting as well as they should be.
Yeah, and if all of this is sounding a little bit overwhelming, that's probably because it definitely can be. But the good news is that, like, with the right tooling and the right reporting, you can really surface the important things. That's one of the reasons why we structure our KPI documents and our reporting dashboards for ourselves as well as our clients like we do, just so that you can kind of cut through the noise and take a look at these, especially like Andy had just mentioned, the macro conversions. Keep your eye on the prize. And then we have several diagnostic metrics that are tied to each of those, where if something's anomalous or there's a shift, we can just kind of zoom right into those diagnostic metrics really easily, cut through all the extra clutter, and surface those insights a lot more quickly than we otherwise would be able to, just looking at the flood of data that any one of these tools is going to be giving you just raw out of the box.
Yeah, you could be running on, I mean, Google Analytics itself has just got a lot of reports and a lot of places to look. People often wander around without having any real idea of what they should be looking for. So it helps if you start out by framing the questions of what do I want to know? Like, what do I think is important to look at each week? And then figuring out how to, ideally, you get those data points into a dashboard using Google Data Studio. That's what we would typically use. And then that becomes one-stop shopping. You can pull in information, at least from the Google suite, you can pull in information from Google Ads, from analytics, from Google Search Console. You can, with third-party connectors, you can pull in data from social platforms as well. So you get a good, rich set of data that you could just look at in one place, and you can isolate, and we'll come back to this as a theme because it's important. You measure the things that are most important. The old, as the old song goes, measure what you treasure. So if you want to focus on a particular set of keywords or particular conversions that you know are important for your business, those are front and center on the dashboard. You don't have to go digging through 15 different tabs in Google Analytics trying to put that information together. It's all right there in front of you, and it's visualized in a way that's convenient for you and your leadership.
Yeah, and beyond just the KPIs on usage, those very same KPIs and reporting like ideas can apply to that long list of health check pieces that we looked at prior as well. There are a lot of tools that we have in our suite, New Relic and others, where we can set up proactive monitoring and reports so that we really don't have to be worrying about looking at those things. It'll kind of ping us when there's an issue, and then we can use those tools and those diagnostic metrics that we've identified to dig in and dive into each of those issues as they arise. So again, don't get lost or feel like you're overwhelmed with all of the things that you have to be doing. You can do this smartly with some you can do this intelligently with I love live stuff. With the right tool set and the right infrastructure. And that's where having a good partner is really going to be important.
Yeah, so I feel like we could talk about website checklists all day. It's a pretty big task to conquer, but we can definitely help and talk to you guys more about it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But let's move on to content marketing and social media. What types of things do we address with this checklist? Andy, do you want to kick us off?
Well, before we leave websites, let's think about the fact that content marketing definitely also impacts the website. It's the thought leadership you're putting together and posting. It's how people are going to find that on your site and how you tease that at various portions of the site, or how you cross-reference or recommend it in different blog posts. So, kind of keeping all that in mind. But then moving on to overall, the big picture here has to do more with content and your content calendar. So where do you go? Most folks who are executing a content strategy, it's a critical piece to have a centralized calendar where you can pretty much see everything, not necessarily write down to the final detail of every word on a post, but at least what stories you're telling at which week or which time of year, and which themes they're hitting, how they play into your overall content strategy, and where they're going to appear. Which ones are going to be on LinkedIn versus Facebook, which ones are going to link back to blog posts on the site or videos on YouTube. Having all of that mapped out is really important. And then just having essentially operating like a news organization, having an editorial meeting once or twice a week where you sit down, review the content calendar, make adjustments and so forth is really critical to that.
And from a management perspective, that high level theming and messaging and establishing it and leaving it just at that content calendar level is going to be really important to make sure that, at the management level, again, you're not trying to get way down in the weeds and getting stuck on individual language or imagery. You're really trusting your team to work within the bounds that thematic messaging is going to lay out. And then letting your team really run with the details, and within maybe your social tool or within HubSpot even, using the individual posting functionality to then let the team get into the nitty gritty of what is the messaging and the imagery on this platform going to be, just let all that settle out within those other tools and keep the content calendar from the management perspective really high level.
So talk to me about reputation management. That's something we always check in on too and encourage clients to check in on. What does that look like?
I think what that looks like is going to vary based on your business and the geographic reach of your business. This can be something as simple as setting up a Google alert or something.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be complicated. There are certain tools like Sprout Social or Hootsuite that offer, kind of like they keep an eye on different combinations of keywords, mentions with your Twitter handle, for instance, or certain hashtags where you can kind of keep an eye on that in the background. But there are also tools within the suite like Moz offers where if you're coming up within, like from a backlink perspective, you're coming up in other websites where folks are talking about you and linking back to you in your content, that can also be really important from an SEO perspective, as well as that reputation management. And there are dedicated tools that can get really expensive, like Meltwater, that are going to kind of take that a step above and are going to be really important for much larger organizations with larger geographic reach.
And then what about competitor analyses? How often should you be checking in on your competitors? And is that something that you should be looking into on a weekly basis? Is that part of the checklist?
I think so, yeah. And again, there are tools where, having to go out manually, keep an eye on your competitors can be really, really time consuming. But there are tools, again, that will do that for you and compile that down into a report to say, here's how your competitors are trending. Here are some of the things that they're talking about that are gaining traction, so that you can just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. And as you're, back to Andy's earlier comment about your kind of editorial meeting that you're having once or twice a week, you can be reviewing those things and making sure that, your competitor isn't talking about something that you really should be, and you're missing out on that. So that's just another kind of piece to the puzzle here.
So we've talked quite a bit about SEO because SEO kind of falls into all of the things: marketing, content, website. But I do want to touch on it a little bit more. What should you be doing weekly with your search engine optimization?
Well, for starters, Google Search Console is your best friend in that area. I mean, there's a lot of very good search tools. We've mentioned a few, such as SEMrush, Moz, Ahrefs, and so forth, and they will give you good data. A good new free one from Neil Patel is Ubersuggest, or it's semi-free. I guess he does have a paid version of it. And they're all pretty accessible. But the great thing about Google Search Console is this is Google telling you how it's crawling you and actually giving you very detailed advice as to what's not being crawled properly, where it's flagging errors, and what you can do about that. So first and foremost, I mean, and obviously it's not good for competitive. It only gives you access to your own search data, but it will tell you exactly how many times, in a period, your content is appearing somewhere in, say the first 500 searches. And in addition to that, it will give you clicks, it will give you your ranking, it will let you drill down into specific keywords. Gives you a lot more data in some ways than what Google Analytics traditionally gives you, and part of that is because the data is completely anonymized, so it's a little more generous with its data, and you can then put that report into Google Analytics or Google's Google Data Studio, right, in order to get a sort of a custom view of it. But the main thing you want to be looking for are things, again, you're looking for anomalies. How are impressions trending, up or down? Are impressions trending up but not clicks? That may or may not be a bad thing. More impressions means more visibility, but if you're not getting clicks, it means that maybe your content is not ranking high enough, hasn't caught up, but that may still be a trailing indicator. So it's not necessarily a reason to panic. From a usability standpoint, You can go and look at their coverage report, which we'd encourage on a regular basis to look at, just in case there are any pages that are throwing errors or warnings that might potentially cause you to lose ranking. And now they have a new report on Core Web Vitals, which is the recently announced set of metrics, 3 of them to be precise, that are Google's going to start tracking by the end of the year, having to do with site performance and page performance. So you can start getting your arms around how you're performing vis-a-vis those metrics right now using the Core Web Vitals report in Google Search Console. So all of those are really great ways to keep on top of potential issues that might impact your user experience in SEO and nip them in the bud before they become real serious. You can, of course, use paid tools like SEMrush and others that we've mentioned. SpyFu is particularly good for keeping track of keywords and competitors. So there's a lot out there, but first and foremost, if you don't have Search Console set up, you're missing out on a whole free valuable data that you absolutely should be taking advantage of.
Yeah, the thing that I like to use Search Console for the most is really identifying those crawl or indexability issues. Because those are going to, like, if you have those are potentially preventing your site from being crawled and indexed on Google, and not being on Google is huge. So really identifying those pieces and then digging down there. And from my perspective, like a lot of the other stuff is more that diagnostic level that we had talked about earlier. Not something that you have to necessarily keep a close eye on, but it's there so that if you do notice a trend or an issue, you can dig down and figure out what's going on.
I mean, technical SEO is, for many, a kind of a boring topic. If you're a search geek, then you really love this stuff. But it is so foundational. If your site's not getting indexed, if there's a problem with your sitemap, or there's errors on your pages that are keeping Google from really crawling them successfully or linking to you, or you're even potentially having pages excluded because they're seen as duplicate content or irrelevant and so forth, that's really just hurting your site. And before you get onto the keywords and all of the sort of the glamorous marketing stuff that people focus on with SEO and backlinks and all the rest of it, site needs to be fundamentally healthy. If it's not, then all that other work, then you're essentially building on a foundation of sand.
Yep.
Well, with the couple minutes we have left, the final checklist I just want to touch on a little bit is paid ads. What do you need to look for? And then how can you adjust based on the weekly data that you see? Andy, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Well, again, maybe this is going to sound a little bit like it's repetitive, but the first and foremost thing that you care about with your ads is, are they working? Are they converting? So you hopefully have your ads set up, you have them geared to conversions, you're either measuring those conversions within the ad platform with certain pixels or tags, or you have imported conversions or otherwise linked them to conversions on Google Analytics so that you can track them there, and maybe even ultimately through into your CRM, so being able to follow a lead that gets generated from an ad to the landing page through the form into HubSpot or some other CRM. And then being able to put a real true value if somebody makes a purchase or it ends up being a deal, to be able to then go back up the chain and attribute some sort of a value to that contact, and therefore what was valuable about that ad campaign. Other than that, if you don't have that conversion data, and in some cases for businesses that are on a longer cycle, particularly in B2B, or businesses that have a sales cycle where the sale may be completed offline, it can be really super challenging to do that, but it's really worth making the effort. Other than that, you have other kinds of performance and vanity metrics that you can use. Calling them vanity metrics makes it sound dismissive, and I don't intend to be. Cost per click is still a really important metric. If you're paying too much for that click, then you want to pause that keyword. So there are other metrics that you want to track besides conversions: click-through rate, cost per click. When it comes to conversions, cost per acquisition, CPA, is probably your most valuable one, but definitely you want to know whether or not your clicks are costing you too much, and do something about that, or you're overpaying for ads that are not maybe producing for you.
Yeah, and one thing that we do with our clients, which we haven't really done ourselves, I'll admit, up until recently, but once a week, just checking in on the contacts that are generated from these lead forms and asking, are they quality? You know, again, we do that for our clients, but something that we just recently started doing ourselves, and it's something that a lot of folks may be overlooking. You know, you may be converting really well, but if you're not converting the right kinds of leads and they're junk, those conversions don't really matter a whole lot. So just kind of zooming out and asking yourself, you know, after you've had some time to look at and your sales team, you know, interacts with some of those contacts, are we getting the right kinds of folks in through these efforts?
Sounds good. Well, thanks, guys. I think that this was a super important conversation. I know it was a lot of information and we only went into it just a little bit, but we do really, really encourage using these checklists. Checking these boxes every day, week, month can make or break your business, can save you a lot of money, can also make you a lot of money. So if you have any questions on any of the topics we covered, chat with us. There's also a bunch of great resources online. So we will be back for our next Digital Lunchbox next week. Thanks, everyone.